on this beautiful rainy day of February 6th of 2024. Councilmember Severing is with us tonight. We've asked him to lead us in an invocation, a thought, and then, or both, and then proceed with the Pledge of Allegiance. Councilmember Severing. I think I would like to give an opening prayer. Yeah.
Heavenly Father, we're mindful tonight of gathering together. We're appreciative of the freedoms that permit this opportunity, and we're grateful to the citizens who are here who can share thoughts and insights and help us in deliberations. We give thanks for this beautiful city that we live in, surrounded by the mountains that seem like fortresses for us. And we pray for all the citizens in the city. May they be blessed with health and strength, and bless those who might be struggling. Give thanks for many blessings, and we pray for this tonight in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
You'll repeat after me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Councilmember Severing. Appreciate that. Based upon our agenda this evening, does anyone have a conflict of interest, perceived or real, they'd like to disclose this evening? Does Mr. Barker have one? John?
No, he's not unmuted himself.
Okay. We'll move on to item number 2 on tonight's agenda. We have 5 sets of minutes to approve tonight. So I hope you've had a chance to look at those. I believe, Ryan, you made the change I sent in, right?
I did, yes. Yep.
Are there any changes, discussion on those 5 sets of minutes this evening that we need to make Ryan aware of?
No, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Councilmember Dalpas.
Okay, I have a couple. On page 3 for the November 28th meeting, there is a resident's name that is misspelled. It is spelled Yaka Atwood, so it's Y-A-K-A, and I confirmed that on the county records instead of J-A-K-A. On on November 28th, I believe it's page 12. It says that there's a Charles, no last name given. He did give his name, but it was muffled on the YouTube. His name is Chad Zog. Last name is Z-A-U-G-G. Otherwise, there's a couple more. I think the one you referred to was the voting order, so that one's taken care of, right? You mentioned that already, you said. Our reporter. On page, sorry, this is really small. Page 6 of December 12th. I motioned to postpone the ordinance 2023-24, and Council Member Barker seconded that motion. And that's accurate, but I was a yes vote on that, and it has me, that's the one you're talking about.
Yes.
Okay.
And then I voted to break that tie.
Okay, and then I think there might be just one more really, really quick. So on page 7 of the December 12th meeting minutes, it says that ordinance 2023-24 passes unanimously. In the wording, it says that it passed unanimously, even though I was a dissenting vote on that one. That's it.
Anything on the 9th or 10th, January?
No.
Councilmember Butler, do you have something?
Just we addressed the address issue on a couple of minutes, but that was the only thing I had.
Okay. That being the case, then with those corrections mentioned, we have a motion to approve the above listed city council minutes.
Mayor, I would approve. We need each of the dates, Ryan, or just collectively?
I think we did.
Collectively would be fine.
I move that we approve all of the city council meetings, November 28th, 2023 to January 10th, 2024.
Okay, we have a second to that motion. Second. Thank you. Second, any discussion? All right, all in favor of approving the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously to approve the minutes. We'll now enter into our active agenda. We're pleased to have Craig Call with us tonight for his annual visit. We really appreciate you taking the time to come. Also provides an opportunity for us and the residents to tell you anything that needs to be improved with John. So, just wanted to give that to you. There's a long list, so we will get rid of it. All right, so with that, Craig, would you like to proceed? Sure. Thank you.
Where should I sit? Sit here?
You can sit anywhere you'd like.
Well, that might be home in front of the TV, but.
Thank you.
With the assistance of the Property Rights Ombudsman's Office, we prepared a book on land use law. And what I've done is print 2 chapters from it. I wish I had enough for everyone here. I just have 3 more copies if that's of interest. And so what I thought we'd do is just kind of have a casual conversation about the issues related to open meetings and open records. In its infinite wisdom, the legislature has required you to endure an hour of this conversation each year. So I once used the term legislative wisdom without the term infinite, and I was correct. I say that having been in the legislature myself, and I'm willing to find myself, and not everybody. Maybe some, but not everybody. It is a pleasure to be here, and our families enjoyed our association with North Ogden City. We live downhill from here in Plain City, but it's never a burden to climb the hill and sit down and get acquainted. Well, so first of all, let's talk about public records. And the idea is that we want our government to be open. And I really don't know where you'd find a democracy that has the philosophy, as well as we do here in the United States, that records are public unless they're specifically designated as public, as private. And I believe Utah's law related to records is as good as they come. And I know that mainly because the sponsor of the bill when it first passed was not a lawyer. So I think there's an advantage there. He was a banker, but he represented the area just west of us here, and we came to speak with the House, but he is responsible, Marty Stevens, for the original Access to Public Records Act. So the idea is we want to promote the public's, not just the right of access, but ease of access. So it's not too complicated. At the same time, we know that public officials and their staff are busy, and it's difficult to respond to someone who wants some kind of urgent, I need it now. So that the act attempts to balance that. The idea, however, is that behind it is the philosophy of open government and open records. And so I admire communities like North Ogden, who do have a law to fall back on if they need to. For example, I can't give you this document without a written request and a 10-day wait. But that's optional. It's no more than a 10-day wait is what the law says. It doesn't say you have to wait 10 days. I've been around the block a little while, and some of the it was discouraging for me, for example, when I, as ombudsman, a position I held for 10 years, the property rights ombudsman, asked a local government if I could just see their ordinances. And they said, fill out a grandma form to see the ordinances. I mean, really. And now North Ogden and everyone else just has them online. You click and they're all there. What a remarkable transition and what a great nod toward open government that has occurred over time as we got more used to this. So basically, like I said, we're balancing two considerations. One, the public's right of access, and there's also a concern about right of privacy. And so there are certainly exceptions to the to public records, and mainly that means things that have to do with individual personal information that really shouldn't be public. And so the law goes into quite a lot of detail about that. Let's look first, if we could, turn to it says page 234 at the top. Not the page yet. So the law creates several categories for documents. You look at the heading down toward the bottom, public documents. Every document's a public document unless private controlled or protected. And private documents typically have to do with private interests. For example, you don't want your medical history revealed just because there's a state agency handling your insurance reimbursements. Or certainly the state personnel office doesn't have to reveal all the information about individuals. I mean, it just isn't required. Those are all protected records, and there's a whole bunch of others as well. Even the books you check out at the library, that's not a public record. It's meant to preserve those issues of privacy. There's no question that if a person really has a legitimate need for some very personal records, that they can file a legal action and get a warrant and do a search, but that's what it takes to look at some private records. Control documents mainly is just medical records, but the tricky part comes in protected documents. And in the local government context, what that often means is, let's say, for example, that there's some sensitive negotiations going on between the city and a developer about how to provide security for improvements on a development. And part of that has to do with the financial statement of the development. Just say maybe, well, it's the developer's responsibility to tell the city that this information is meant to be private and protected is the proper word. And the developer needs to do that in writing. The city has the option to make an initial review and decide whether that's an appropriate request. But if the city says, okay, we will protect the document, then the person who seeks it does have an appeal process they can go through. But if the person who provided this document that needs to be protected doesn't ask for it, the city doesn't on its own have the authority to say, well, we're just not going to show that because we think it's too sensitive. Question or comment about that? So if the city comes in possession of Trump's tax returns, he would have to ask you not to release them for some reason. If you had occasion to get them, or something from Hunter Biden's laptop. I mean, basically the idea is that private individuals who want to protect their private information need to have some initiative to do that. And the crazy thing is, of course, that we don't all know that. It's not intuitive. But two good things about that is, number one, again, we want the bias to be that records are open. And number two, when there are questions, lawyers make money. So you got all of that. I agree. So, any question about that? So if you look on page 235, business confidentiality. If a record provided by a business to an agency is desired to be protected, the business must provide a claim of confidentiality and state the reasons. Then the agency can still classify the record as public if it notifies the business, but it's the business, not the government agency, that originates the idea. Then, not a public record, and this includes things that come across all the time, temporary drafts. So if I get on the computer and I draft an email and don't send it, then that's a draft. If I punch the send button, it ain't a draft anymore. And remember, public records are documents in the possession of the public entity. And if you're using your North Ogden email account, everything you say, every message you enter is a public document because it's in a system maintained by the local government. Question, concern, argument about that? Yes.
It's safe to assume that we should use our official city emails for any matters pertaining to the city. Is that correct?
I think that's the best way to do it. I'm not saying you should avoid using those emails, because that is a legitimate way to record and document and keep track of what's going on. There was a certain presidential candidate in 2016 who had some real issues with destroying emails because she had used her personal server instead of using the State Department server. That's how complicated it gets sometimes. And I am not saying that we'll have a Russian investigation over whatever happened with your emails. But it's just important to be aware of that, because whether or not we understand it or not, somebody does. And they may have the ability to demand copies of those emails that you wish, have better context for them or something. Thoughts or comments about that? John, do you want to tell any horror stories?
I did have a question for you.
Okay.
So
Ask the questions. You'll have to give me that.
if there's a document where the last version of the document created is entitled draft, does it remain like a non-public record? Or if there's never going to be a future version, does that become the final version?
I think that's something that your records officer could decide either way, but probably should lean toward it being an open document. Again, the bias is that it should be open. And if I posted a document online at the Utah Land Use Library yesterday, and I had draft written all over it as a watermark simply because I didn't want to edit it yet. But I had given a seminar on the subject and thought I should, respond to people who wanted what I said in writing to have access to it now. So I put it online. It ain't no draft. It's, a person can hold me to that. I published it. And that's the issue. If you publish it, then it needs to be considered a public document. Let me tell you a story. I once wrote a letter to a neighbor of the city hall, and she had a boundary dispute with the city. And the idea was that the boundary between her house and the city hall parking lot was created by a fence line that had existed for 20 years. And obviously that's an old English doctrine that's subject to some dispute. And she had gone the rounds with the city about that. And so a new city council person was elected in November election of this year, and he received a packet. And in the packet was noticed that on the agenda for the next city council was this neighbor and a summary by the outgoing mayor of what her thoughts were on the subject. And it wasn't a happy event. So the newly elected city council member passed the information on to the property owner, who showed up as she was entitled to and responded. They had an exchange. And another member of the city council then made a motion that the city council minutes and packets should not be given to councilmen-elect until they take office. And I wrote another letter that said, I think that's curious. Well, the bottom line is it's a public document. And typically you don't have to reveal a public document at the longest until 10 days after a person asks for it. But if information is submitted to the council for a decision tonight, then by darn, everybody ought to have access to the documents that are supporting the conversation as which way the council should go. And if there are private documents, then they are often considered in a private meeting that we'll talk about a little later. And then we're legitimately protecting the public's interest and the interest in those protected documents. But by and large, again, I'm sorry to have said it 6 times, the bias is to have things be open. Questions, comments?
Can you give us some examples, for instance, of a privately owned document followed by calendars and notes? That are not a public record.
Well, so calendars and notes evidently are, that they are specifically mentioned in the act as not being, public document. A document that is owned by a private party and hasn't been released to the city is still in that private person's control and ownership. So that would not be a public document. If a person was arguing on a development and claimed there was a dispute and that there were, they stood and held up documents and said, I have it right here. It's a deed saying that this land doesn't belong to who they say it belongs to. Well, that person can waive it and claim it, but they haven't released it yet. And the city logically say, we're gonna call a timeout until we get a copy of the document. When you get a copy of the document, it's a public document, but until then, it's privately owned. Calendars and notes evidently would apply to city officials and city staff who are simply making notes and not meant to be anything conclusive or evidentiary. Again, these are the Records Act. If something came up that was of a nature that the law required discovery of those kinds of things, they could be discovered, but not because of grandma. They'd be discovered because of the process lawyers use to get evidence. Does that kind of help? Okay. Records of closed meetings, of course, are not public documents. Attorney-client documents, for example, and by this drives me crazy because I have been involved in some litigation on both sides. And one of the dangers in litigation, and by the way, I have no idea if there's anything going on in North Ogden at all, but just generally speaking, one of the dangers that public officials have to be aware of is that the only source of information they have about the lawsuit is what they hear in a closed meeting from their own attorney. And sometimes basically that just doesn't give everybody the full perspective. So, for what it's worth, what the attorney provides in those closed meetings is not public and no one will know. The other side will never know unless someone reveals it. And those who are in closed meetings and receive documents have an obligation not to share it. I mean, it would be inappropriate for a member of the council, for example, to share documents shared in a closed meeting that would otherwise be sensitive and protected documents. For whatever reason existed to share them, it would be bad form. Okay.
So, Craig, well, sure, ramifications if the council member does that for the mayor.
Well,
Is that something the city puts in their procedures, or what prevents a council member from?
It's a Class B misdemeanor. It's a crime.
that paragraph exists a little bit later in the discussion. Denial. If access is denied, there has to be a notice of denial as to state identified that there is such a document or not. And if it's not to be shared, then why it's not shared. And usually that means quoting which chapter and verse in GRAMA, the Government Records Administration Act, applies to that document, so that otherwise can be protected. Destruction. If access to record is denied, that record is not to be destroyed or given to another agency before the appeal period is passed. And that's really bad form. And that then really ratchets up the stakes and gets us into some criminal activities if in fact it's done to avoid prosecution for something the person is guilty of. And I use the word guilty like a person would necessarily know that. Guilt is determined by the law, not by the Sunday school teacher. So it's really a matter of trying to make sure we're on the right side of the law. As well as what sounds good. Government agencies can share records that are not public under certain circumstances. After a record is denied, then the person who asked for it and didn't get it gets 30 days to appeal. And then on the top of page 236, penalties. It's a class B misdemeanor to knowingly disclose records that should not be disclosed, or to gain access to records that should not be disclosed by false pretenses, bribery, or theft. So this goes both ways. If a person steals records from the city that shouldn't be public and makes them public, you noted that the person who did steal Trump's tax returns and leaked them was given a prison sentence recently in the national media. If a person intentionally refuses to release a record which is legally required to be released, that could be a class B misdemeanor. And attorney fees can be ordered. See, you thought it was bleak. There is good news here. As we move through the statute, there's room for legal advice and to avoid legal advice. The city always maintains a ground form. It's usually online. The person can submit it, and it's meant to be that way, easy and pretty simple. The biggest problem with grammar requests are we have no idea what you're talking about when you submit it, or you're a lawyer. Each and every document related to this that has anything to do whatsoever, or associated with any rumor that's ever been circulated related to this issue or something. I mean, it gets so broad that cities often have to, in that kind of case, make some motion, response to protect themselves because they have no idea what someone's talking about. And if the request is excessive, the city can charge the cost of recording the record and producing it. But if the record's in the file and it's right there, especially if it can just be transmitted electronically, typically the city doesn't charge for that. That's the gist of it. Questions or comments? Anything that staff thinks I haven't covered yet? Okay. All right, moving on. Open and public meetings. So this is a fun little statute. And the problem is I have to decide just how to stop telling the war stories because it is, again, some of this is just simply not intuitive. But generally speaking, when public bodies meet and talk about the public's business, there are kind of three different levels of this. There's a public meeting where everybody's noticed through the state public meeting notice website and the city's own website. And people can come and observe, and that's all. They don't necessarily have the right to participate. There's a public hearing, and that's different than a public meeting. Public hearing is where people do have an opportunity to speak, assuming they fall into the category of those who were invited to speak under the local ordinance. And then there are closed meetings, where the only people there are people that are part of the decision-making and the advisors who need to advise them in confidentiality about how to make a decision. So those categories are typically the ones that apply. But a public body is any decision-making entity. And I admire, I looked on North Ogden's website. I looked tonight to see if I was on the agenda, and sure enough, there I was. That there's, Cherry Days is on there. There are other committees, and we are on the side of making sure that it's an entity that makes decisions related to the public's business. So the definition is numbered on page 239. So it's created by the Constitution, statute, rule, ordinance, or resolution. So you can create a public body by resolution. But if you just ask a few neighbors to get together and what do you think about that? That's not a public body. But if it's appointed by the council or by the mayor, and under an ordinance or resolution, then that's a public body. It has two or more members.
I serve as the appeal authority for some cities. And often when the city transfers from the old Board of Adjustment model to a hearing officer model, the city staff's all geared up to give notices and do minutes. And I said, well, I'm not a public body. So you don't need to do that. It's not a public meeting, it's not a public hearing, it's not a public body, period. And that doesn't mean the records aren't public, because they certainly are. But it's not it's more like a court hearing where parties that are entitled to due process are notified and they participate. But the public doesn't receive notice of every lawsuit, and they don't receive notice of every appeal that goes to an appeal authority for every variance request. The body also, number 3, expends, disperses, or is supported in full or part by tax dollars. And has to be all of these, invested with the authority to make decisions about the public's business. And there is some gray area there. And like I say, I admire North Arden because you err on the side of including the public in the process. But if the entity basically doesn't have any authority to make decisions about the public's business, then that could be used to say, well, it's really not a public body. And if a member of the public is looking at this and doesn't necessarily have a chip on their shoulder, then all this makes sense. But that one of the reasons we want to err on the side of openness is because some people don't understand and may be concerned, and we want to make sure we don't appear to be trying to avoid public information when it really isn't that painful to do so. But you'll notice the bottom says groups of staff who meet together in ad hoc committees of self-appointed individuals who need to propose changes in policy or not public bodies. However, if the staff's, I went to one appeal authority where the staff was the appeal authority. I thought that was interesting. I thought it was more interesting because I showed up to speak. This was in Florida. And one of the staff members on the appeal authority said, I move we deny this appeal. And the chair of the body said, well, hold that thought. Could we hear from the person who brought the appeal first and then you can make your motion? But well, they've talked about this, and that is not appropriate because they are the decision-making body. And for them to have huddled, even if it was electronically by conference call or some other means, if they had a conversation about this, especially in an appeal, where it's a quasi-judicial, then that's just out of order. And that's where you get off into the real intent of the Open Meetings Act and how it can sometimes raise issues. The whole purpose is that the conversations that go on among public officials about public policy should be open. And there's well, I'll get into the weeds a little bit deeper after I get through this. So what is a meeting? But yes.
I just need to ask a question for clarity. So I've been reading through your book on land use, and it talks about public meeting versus public hearing. I was interested to learn that, and we've heard about this just recently, some discussions you've had as a council. Why don't they make public comments a mandatory part of public meetings? Because I understand there are some city councils in Utah that don't actually have public comments available.
Well, and that was a recent controversy with our own county commission for Weber County. They decided to eliminate it from their public meetings because and I'm just really, I just have an impression. All I know about it is what I read in the Standard Examiner. So, but the idea was that it took too long and was just too disruptive. It wasn't productive for anybody, according to the county commission. So it's the question is, why do they do that or not? They is you. So it's up to you. If you mean why does the legislature allow it or not, then we're probably better off making a decision locally, in my own personal opinion. But the problem is that if the legislature, for example, were to mandate public comments in every meeting, then The most raucous meetings that I've heard of lately is the Inland Port Authority in Salt Lake City. And when they were, a few years ago, when they were just getting started, they could not hold a meeting because the public disrupted their meeting so severely, they couldn't conduct business. And so there, again, there's a balance. And I admire North Ogden for striking a balance in favor of, let's see how we can do this.
So in other words, there's no statute,
There's no statute.
no statute.
But you can set your own bylaws and rules. You could even, in your own bylaws, you could say that on motion of a member of the council, we could cut off the public portion of the public comment section if it got too long. Of course, it's up to the chair of the meeting to decide if things are taking too long. But they are offsetting opportunities for the public. I mean, they can always be invited to submit information in writing. It's not like this is the only way to submit information, because they do have access to other means. And it rarely is a problem, but when it is, it's a big one. But people can't get the public's business done.
Thank you.
Sure. Ask me another short question, I'll give you a long yes.
Can I just?
Sure.
So just to clarify, I underlined this, thus them with authority, because if there was a group that came to, that came with advice or recommendation, that group wouldn't need to be reported of any kind unless they were vested with authority, meaning they can give recommendations, but unless they've been appointed by the mayor or something, they don't have any authority. It's just a recommendation. Okay.
That has to be by an ordinance or resolution. So the mayor might ask for some people to consult and offer some thoughts. That's not a public group.
Okay.
But on the other hand, it may be an opportunity for a broader conversation as well. So again, these are the minimum rules. You can always be more open than what the law allows. But you don't have to be, there are times when you can be less open than the public wishes for good reason in every case. If that makes some sense. So study sessions, workshops, executive sessions, field trips, formal sessions discussing on a matter, they're all meetings and include some kind of electronic forms of communication. It includes some electronic forms of communication. It includes some forms of electronic communication. If you copy all of Eversman Council in a discussion about a topic, we're got an issue here. I mean, it's, again, the place to have a group discussion is in a group format. And you can have a public meeting by electronic means. Provide the notice and have a public electronic meeting. But and this is really not something that would happen in North Ogden as it might in some places that, they just haven't got the news. But it's meant to be that way. Again, fewer than a quorum of the council can meet and have a conversation. You can meet by chance and without an agenda because you're not talking about anything. You can meet socially. But when the purpose of the gathering is to chat about something on the public's agenda, then it needs to be formally noticed. And it only needs 24 hours at the worst. So it can be done in a way that meets the requirements without a whole lot of hassle. Question or comment about that? Yes, John.
I have a question. So, in our city, we have an email that includes all the city council members that residents can ask questions and then there's responses. But I think, are you saying that anytime they respond to everyone that should qualify as a meeting, or is it only if they're discussing and making decisions on items?
It's a really good question. Do you go to law school or something? So I think that would be viewed in light of its intent. In other words, it's meant to be public and the information could be made as public and the invitation of who can participate as public as possible. And we're not making decisions, but we are getting impressions. And to the extent when we make a decision, those exchanges play a role, it might be included in the record of that decision. As a hearing officer, I've actually conducted hearings by email only, without any kind of a public meeting or even a conference call. I ask the parties what they think. And I read an appeal and it says, this is the issue, and I articulate the issue saying, this seems to be quite a straightforward legal issue. If you want to, we can just exchange emails. Was the person asking for the appeal to express their legal reasoning? The city can respond. Then we respond back and forth until everybody said what they've said, and then I'll make a decision. And it'll be very easy on everybody's schedule, and we can do this quickly. And that's been accepted, and we've done it that way in a few cases. Sometimes I've held a public hearing and gone forward with it with email exchanges after that, where even if there's lawyers involved, they send briefs on different sides, and then without objection, made a decision. So email can be really convenient and helpful. But the kind of question John asked about informal group email exchanges with the public, I don't see that as a problem at all. I think it's more intent, wouldn't you think? And of course, anyone who wanted copies of that email exchange, excuse me, that's a public record and easily accessible by anybody. The times this has been a real problem is when the members of the council don't want to share the emails. Because they said, Joe, did you know that guy who just made this application went bankrupt in the last place he was at? Well, that's information that should be given to the person who has the application before you, so they are aware that that's a concern, rather than have it go on behind the scenes and nobody articulating it and saying that's a factor in our decision. Because if a person's before you and wants an answer, they're entitled to respond to any factor that you think is part of your decision-making process. Does that make sense? Okay. Public notice, by the way, this has been changed in the most recent version of the book because of the legislature's changing the public notice process, made it much more simple and enhanced it, although there are a few technicalities that people like John handle when they come up. There's process for emergency meetings, even less than 24 hours notice. If you've got landslides and hills moving, and for some reason the council needs to meet to make a decision, for example, to fully authorize the city to engage emergency help, contractors and excavators and others urgently, then the council can do that, just the best means possible. And then everything that's done made public so that it can be reviewed if necessary. And then it's good to use electronic meetings. It's great to have Zoom on every meeting. It's just a wonderful new enhanced way to engage the public in what we're doing. Any comment or question about that? Okay, so what if we discuss something that's not on the agenda? The law's evolved a little bit, and it's a little bit less complicated than it used to be. It used to be that someone would say, well, I think you should consider the potholes on, I won't say a specific street. And the response would be, well, we can't talk about that, it's on the agenda. Actually, you can't talk about it if someone else brings it up. If the citizen brings it up, you can talk about it. You can't make a decision on the issue if it's a big enough decision that it needs to be given notice. And by that, I mean a decision on the merits, like the decision to say, ask the mayor to ask John to just take care of it, which is the best way to solve a problem. That isn't a decision. But if a person wants the law changed and it's the planning commission can't just recommend an amendment to the zoning ordinance without having noticed it and posted it and doing all the things that needs to be done. So the planning commission wouldn't hear an idea from a member offering a public comment and then entertain a motion to actually change the code. It's more complicated than that. But you knew that already. So it used to be that we didn't talk about those things, but now we can. It isn't good form for members of the council to bring up new items and talk about it. But if a member of the public brings it up, as long as we don't make a decision, we can do it. And I would say there's a little more flexibility. If we've got a crisis we didn't know about until Channel 2 showed up, then there, you know, the agenda, if it's an emergency, of course, the agenda can be amended without 24-hour notice. The best thing would be, of course, to revise the notice that's given before 24 hours, or to hold a second meeting 24 hours or something. You know, you have a variety of options, but again, this law is flexible enough that it should not get in the way of doing the public's business when it needs to be done. The difference between a public meeting and a public hearing. And I guess the one thing I'd mention, and the problem is I'm thinking of all the situations I'm aware of where things weren't really clear. And I shouldn't assume in this case with this group that you would not be aware of such things. But I remember going to a planning commission meeting and I had some thoughts. And they had it on their agenda, the issue. And so they started talking about it and I raised my hand and the chair of the planning commission said, "I'm sorry, Craig, you can't speak. It isn't a public hearing." No, at a public hearing, people have the right to speak. In a public meeting, they have the opportunity to speak if the chair asks them to. I mean, it's not like people can't speak at a public meeting. It's just they don't have the right to speak. But the council can decide informally, you know, whether they want to hear from someone or not. It's not meant to be that rigid. The idea that if a person has grief on what you're talking about, they have to wait 30 days to get on the agenda doesn't make much sense at all to me. Question about that? Okay. The minutes are kept and thoroughly reviewed. I admired how you did that this morning.
Greg?
Yes.
I have a question.
Sure.
One of the boards I sit on is a special district.
Mhm.
They always have on their agenda closed session, potential closed session, and that was put on there by the advice of their attorney.
Yeah.
How does that work?
Well,
If I'm reading this right, it says that it has to have specificity.
Well, I think it does. And there are many entities that do that, in special districts in particular. In my experience, that they just always put it on the agenda. In fact, sometimes they always do it. They always go into closed meeting. And one of the problems is that it's a little loosey-goosey here. Real or pending litigation, what does that mean? Well, in some cases, the local officials say, well, somebody might sue us over this. So we get to go in private and talk about it. And I don't think that's good form. And if a person pushed it, I think there could be some problems in a case like that. And the agenda, yes, should say closed public meeting or closed meeting to discuss the individual issues with a person's employment. I forget what the exact is, but those kind of private confidential issues are fine. You certainly don't have to mention the individual. The individual could come into the closed meeting and talk, you know, and go through the process. But there was a problem with local government entities interviewing potential members of the council in private, and the legislature did stomp on that. They didn't like that very well. But it's, yes, the reason for the closed meeting should be justified. And at the time we go into a closed meeting, there has to be a motion made, as you know. And that motion, if all else is not accurate and formal and detailed, that one should be. So before they actually go in the meeting, it should be stated what which one of the purposes it is.
Because I think what we've done generally since I think I've been involved here is that we say we're going into closed session for one of the reasons outlined in the statute. We don't get specific to say we're going to talk about a real estate offer or a personnel issue. we've tried to just kind of say, for one of the purposes approved in state statute. And this what those are. We don't get very specific.
What do you think, John?
He's the one that did it. so.
Yeah.
Defend yourself, mine from good.
Well, so a good example is, in my opinion, personnel is hard. Because oftentimes a personnel discussion, you don't necessarily want everyone to know you're talking about personnel, because then it gets everyone's hair.
It's just
on
not
edge.
that big a city. huh?
Yeah, but and that's the only time I think that we're typically generic, is we don't wanna. Oftentimes it doesn't lead to anything.
Well, an example, you finalize the development agreement and part of the issues are legal. Then it seems logical in that case, everybody knows that's the purpose of the meeting. To explain, we're going into the closed meeting to talk about the issues related to this settlement. Everybody knows we're talking about a settlement. So, my thought is you give whatever information is appropriate to give without compromising the interests of the public or the city in doing it.
I've got to kind of challenge John's logic here, because if the only time we put it on there is generic is when we're talking about. I mean, everybody's sort of talking about
Right.
personnel matters, right? Sure. Well, I do agree with John that, that does get people's, interest, heightened. And then it actually, in my opinion, kind of invades the privacy of that individual.
Yes.
So,
You're persuading me.
okay,
Wait,
I think it's a broad area. I'm not, I'm from one point of view that may be a little more controlling on something like that than others might be, and the others might be better aligned with the law than I am. Excuse me, John, did you?
I was just gonna say, he's convincing you, but I'm just.
The other board I serve on, what we usually do is like on this page, 244, we just like list whichever one of these applies, but the whole statement. So if it's a real estate transaction, we won't necessarily just say that, we'll list this like real estate, water right, let people guess on it, I suppose, at that point.
Well, remember, I think the thing to remember at like a closed meeting is when the time has passed for the purpose of the meeting, this becomes public. So be aware that the things that are said in the closed meeting can be made public later when there doesn't need to be, there's no reason for it to be private. I don't know if that means audio recordings. I know that in a case where someone disputes whether there's a legitimate closed meeting, the judge listens to the recordings. It goes to district court, the judge listens to the recordings and decides whether or not it's legitimate to release it or not. But it's best to err on the side of, we wanted to conduct the public's business, but not necessarily criticize others in a way that we don't want made publicly.
And I'll modify that just a little. With professional character and competence, that doesn't become public, but documents do. So as soon as those documents are finalized, real estate transactions are a great example. That's all a public document. And so it's available for public inspection.
I would say too, since I've been here 4 years now, there has been a string of text messages that involves the whole council. It's been in place for 4 years. I'm starting to think that's not too wise.
Now, that's problematic.
So whoever's got that on their string, whoever created it, do away with it. Say better to be safe than sorry.
If you're on the city's telephone or using the city's email, there's no question those documents created, that the email exchanges are public. But if you use your personal email for public business, then your personal emails related to public business can also be public. And that can be a problem. Because somebody has to go through your personal communications to decide which violated the open, or which are subject to public disclosure. I don't mean it's a violation. So it is a good idea to use your city account for city business. And there are ways to just like when you were asked tonight if you had any conflicts or disclosures. If you had conversations about an administrative issue that you're going to decide, then the proper way to do that after the fact, if it has to be after the fact, is to simply disclose and summarize and explain how that influences you, and so people that are of the other opinion can respond to it. And the text exchanges, if they turn out to be of any kind of substance at all, should be printed out and made public, so that people can respond to it. There are ways to try to do things in a way that resolve that. Yes.
So back to the mayor's comment about the text thread. It would be safer than if we were to share something that's just for your information. I found this out or something, or that here's some. It's not a decision making, but it's informational. That would still be better if we sent it via email instead of text, is what you're
I
saying.
think so. But the thing to do is, number one, to include people other than the people in the body itself. So the city recorder or someone could be part of that and then preserve those documents. That might be, preserve them as public records. And that accomplishes the same thing. But, it's complicated because if everybody met and had an exchange in real time around the table, at the, at Huckins or somewhere, there's no question that's a violation of the Meetings Act. But when we do something that actually accomplishes the same thing without being in person, that is real-time electronic exchanges, then it's a slippery slope because, there may be defenses to the fact that it's simply just information and not what's the word I'm thinking of? It's not the consideration of the issues. But I know it's illegal as soon as you cross the line and say, we've got this issue coming up before us tonight, I'm against it, and I don't think you guys should support it. The bell should go off and alarms go. To share documents, my recommendation be, of course, that it not just be the council members, and that the city recorder be part of it. And that to the extent the city recorder or one of the city administrators considers that to be something that needs to be public, that the process is made to make it public. And that everybody should assume it will be public. Is that of some interest, John? Is that no?
I think so. And it is hard because that line is blurry, right?
Right.
Like, hey, everyone, there's the polar plunge this weekend. It's different than what's pending and what's maybe been in the past.
I'm sorry to be so wishy-washy, but there comes a point when I have to as a lawyer. Because if everything was certain, we wouldn't have enough work, and that's a bad thing. Any other questions or comments on open meetings?
So, a text thread for simple things such as, hey, council, I'm gonna be going to this event. I wanna remind you guys that we have the polar plunge. I wanna remind you that we have cherry days, something or other. It's a very convenient, get the word out very easily. Everyone doesn't look at their email every minute of the day usually. I would assume that's very safe to send to the council as just an informational, but it's really no type of decision making. So I don't know, I guess maybe we could err so much that we don't use text messages, but I don't know.
Some of it is you don't know in what context somebody might challenge it and really try to make hay out of it. But the one threshold thing I'd recommend is don't have it just be the council. If I say that again, so it's more than just the council. And when you do share information like that, innocuous scheduling and reminders that because there are people other than the council involved, it's not just the public body. And then we go to, that solves the first threshold of it being a public meeting per se. And then we look at the content and say, okay, is this something that should not have been done in this kind of format? But at least it gets us into the second question instead of saying that it basically is just 5 members of the council communicating with each other and nobody else. As an argument, as an attorney, I'd a whole lot rather defend any issue that came up if other city officials were involved in exchange as well, every time. What that's. Well, I'm through if you're through, Mayor. You might have something else to talk about tonight.
More than happy to entertain questions from the council. In fact, I'm more than happy to entertain questions from the public. Anyone have any questions? That'll be the time. Scott?
So there was a bit of clarification, but then I was confused on the public hearing being obligatory public comments versus a public meeting when it's at the chair's discretion. So it matters how it's written on the agenda. Is that right? I mean, if the agenda is an administrative action that is typically just a public meeting, not a public hearing by state law, but it's inadvertently labeled as a public comment period or a public hearing, does that obligate the council and or planning commission to take public comments? Or where's that line specifically?
So if let's say item's on the agenda and it's mislabeled as a public hearing, then I think it's the judgment call of the body holding the meeting to decide how to handle that, because there is no law that requires it to be a public hearing if it's not an issue. By the way, the only land use issues where public hearings are required are legislative. And that means a change in the zoning ordinance, a change in the zoning map, a change in the general plan, and annexation. Those are the only things that are legislative. And they all require they're not the only things that are legislative, but they're the only ones where a public hearing is required, and it's before the planning commission. The local ordinances often allow a public hearing for the same issues when they come to the council for legitimate reasons. But if it's not required to be a public hearing, then it's at the discretion of the body. But the idea that people were misinformed before they showed up would certainly play into my mind if I were the land commission.
Any other questions? Well, Craig, thank you. You're a gentleman for spending time with us, and we really appreciate it. We'll have John take you out to dinner or something.
That sounds great.
On his bill, of course.
So some of you may not have the book that this came from. I brought some extra copies. Members of the council that don't have this book. I don't.
And
Sure.
probably Lisa doesn't have it as well.
I do actually.
Oh, you do?
and I've read it. Thanks to Scott over here. Yeah.
Okay.
Got it covered. Yes, good job. Thank you.
By the way, we've given these away, and I know that because Amazon now has secondhand version. If they didn't get a benefit of it any other way, some of the people who got the book are able at least to put it on Amazon for $3.
You get an autograph version.
Oh, yeah.
I have one for sale.
At least none of the ones I saw on Amazon showed autograph.
Thanks so much, Craig. Thank you. We'll now move into item 4 on our agenda, which is public comment. And once again, let me just review the process there. You can step up to the podium, state your name. And if you're a resident of North Ogden. Also, I would ask that you review items A through G on the back of the agendas, which talks about the 5 minutes. And also talks about the comments, questions must be pertinent to city business. And there are no argumentative questions or personal attacks. Under the procedures of the council, the mayor, if there are personal attacks, can halt that discussion, which he surely would. And then once again, as we've talked about before, some comments and questions may have to wait for a response till the next meeting. We will try to answer those that we can in the meeting, but if not, we will wait for the next council meeting. And then, of course, my favorite thing, Madam G, the mayor will inform the citizen whenever she has used their allotted time. As always, so please prevent me from having to do that. It's uncomfortable. So with that,
Mayor, can I make a quick comment?
out of order, Member Dowpass.
Okay, I tried to invite some residents that live by Northview Estates Phase 9. So I just wanted to encourage if there's anyone that lives on 3800 North, right by that development, if they can please publicly comment just to make sure any of their thoughts or concerns are known, because I like that at the very beginning, so it's not reactive at the end.
Yeah, it's always good knowing what's on the agenda to make your comments so that the council can consider them, even though there won't be any decisions made tonight, that information can be taken into consideration when the decision is made. So with that, we'll start with public comments. And John, if you'd watch online, please. See if there's anyone that has a comment.
Stephanie Casey, North Ogden resident. A recent text message within a council discussion regarding city business is highly concerning. First of all, I want to be clear that however you come to your decisions, whatever your process is personally, I respect that. Using your religion, your God, or a prophet of God within the council or publicly as a reason for your decision is manipulation. It makes it hard for anyone to disagree or see it differently when your decision openly comes from your God or religious beliefs. Drawing parallels between a man wanting to buy his child out of slavery with a man who built a garage accessory unit in his backyard is bonkers. City council using public comments to scapegoat your lack of action is horrific. The heavy burden Mr. Wallace may have felt was self-inflicted. Seeing the heavy weight your church carries on decisions at the state level concern me. I don't want that in my city. As one of many in this community who are not part of your religion, messages like this are isolating.
Anyone else? We have anyone online, John?
No raised hands at this point.
So my name is Josh Christensen, and I was just concerned about the development that's going up north of 3800 North, and I'm concerned about retaining wall, what it's going to look like, how high it's going to be, what the plans are for drainage. And I know they're also planning on having a rock crushing machine. Concerned about noise from that, dust from that, and so I'm just wanting to get details on those items.
Anyone else?
Mayor,
Yes, John?
we have had Susan Kilborn raise her hand and lower it again. I know we've had issues with that in the past. Maybe we should see if she has a comment.
Fine, okay, good.
Okay. Let's see. We should be able to hear her now.
Okay, hi. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Can you hear me now? Okay, couple of things. What Stephanie said, I hope you really all take to heart, because I love you all, but you have to cover all of us. Please think that way in all your thoughts. And I know you will, and I know you'll try. Now, I want to, from my previous experience as an attorney and federal investigator, address an issue to the Mr. Calls. I think you are both remiss that you did not mention there is a federal law called the Freedom of Information Act. John, are you familiar with that?
Yes.
Okay, so it took me a while when you guys were all talking about grandma. I didn't know what the hell you were talking about. Sorry, I swore. Gosh, Chris put a quarter in. And I just wanted to make you and everyone aware that there are differences between Utah State's grandma and the United States federal government's FOIA is what it's called, Freedom of Information Act. So if you're going to be scrutinizing what you say and what you write and what you do, I hope that you will check both those laws. If you're going to check just one, you need to do both. Thank you. Oh, I didn't say Susan Kilborn, North Ogden, Utah.
Thank you, Susan. Anyone else, John, online?
None online.
Okay, then we will proceed with the next item on the agenda. Josh, hopefully this will answer your questions. We're going to have a discussion on the Northview Estates phase proposed grading plan. Diesel will be leading that discussion, so.
Thank you for, first of all, for letting us be on the agenda. I'm Cecil Satterthwaite with Vallejo Management. And this is Brett Satterthwaite. And we're the developers of Northview Estates. I've got a few copies. And we're currently building Northview Estates Phase 9. There's several pages. So what we're seeking to do is upgrade our grading plan. And the main portions of this is it would include a mobile processing and screening plant on site. And also retaining walls. And there's several reasons that we would like to do this. In the past, as we move up the hill, we've had trouble with drainage. And one of the reasons is generally we build a swale at the top. But as we just sell the lots to builders, some, individuals. But it's been a recurring problem that as they'll build rock walls to kind of terrace it, whether it be the homeowner or the builder, a lot of that dirt gets thrown up onto our property and fills in that swale. And then, so that drainage goes away. And so I think we can alleviate that with doing these retaining walls. And if you look at, I know that the residents have concern, and this is this has a cross section.
I think the other thing to mention too is, so phase 9, we already have approval on and is under construction. And so what we're wanting to do is, the past phases we've done, we haven't been completely happy with the end product. And I think we've had issues that the city's realized also. A lot of times that last grading is the last thing on the home that gets done. At that time, some people probably are a little out of money or whatever, and some people end up doing it right and really good, and others, it doesn't turn out quite as good. And so what we're looking at doing is more of a finished grade product with retaining walls, the grading all of finished grade where the builder can just go right in, and do the excavation for the footings, foundation and that. So there'll be a lot more grading done at the construction side. With doing that, the drainage will be addressed through the initial design and construction.
Yeah, how do you?
Would it be appropriate if there's residents that want to look at this?
Yeah.
I don't have any problem with them
Yeah.
standing right here. You okay with that, Mayor? Just in case anyone wants to look, you can come stand and check it out.
I have more questions.
One, if you don't mind.
Mayor,
John, I have a
Yes.
question. Are you there?
Yeah.
And we can send this out to more information. This is kind of typical of the wall we would be doing.
So they're large, they are convex, I don't know, but they're large, like 2 foot by 4 foot by 3 foot large. The front does have a rock that it mimics. It's very good. By concrete, it has a rock fascia that blends it.
And they're hollow in the center, so the way they're kind of designed is there's a drainage at the bottom. And that may show better on that. And then also at the top of the wall, we would put another drainage in too. And it works out really well here because we've got that storm drain coming up to here, and that's the low point. So we would build a 6 to 8 foot wall on the back of these properties, which would have 2 drainage pipes that would come down and tie into our storm drain, which would help protect the neighbors on 3800 North. And then on the top, it's the same thing. We've got a storm drain coming up here. We would like to add to the plat. Our low spot is about this point. We would put just a drainage easement here, so those drainage points could go to there and then come and go to there. So everything would go into instead of just having a swale, that it's more permanent. And then if they, with that rock wall there, they won't just be bringing the dirt back up. With the processing plant, these retaining walls are expensive. With the hollow core, we want to put good material in. We would save hundreds of trucks just for that material.
Material behind the wall has to be structural fill compacted in. It'd have to be imported. It's not processed on site. So it'll be, save a lot on trucking, through
On city roads.
back and forth. We do realize that, any product that's created on site will stay on site. I think that's a concern that the council we've heard has. And I think there's, several reasons why. I mean, we have no incentive to do that, because we have a large project with all the future lots going, so we have plenty of reason for utilizing the material. But part of that is as long as all material stays on site, an MSHA ID is required for the processing plant. As soon as any material leaves, then an MSHA ID is there. We also have another gravel pit that we're partners in that actually sells material, and so we don't have, there's no financial reason to sell it out, move material out of here for that. We would just like to be able to, I think it gives us, like Cecil had mentioned, the walls are a very expensive thing, and this just helps it be a little more economical, and then also reduces the truck traffic on the city roads.
So how tall are the walls again? 6 to 8 feet, is that what you said?
Yeah, they're 6 to 8 foot, and then we're in the process right now, as part of this design, we're actually designing the earthwork on phase 10. Because one thing we're doing now is doing full lots, all the way property to property in the design of the earthwork. And so, the walls on this phase will be 6 to 8 foot, but then there'll be a 2-to-1 slope as it goes up to phase 10, and then there'll be another 6 to 8 foot wall on the future phase.
Yeah, this is kind of.
Which a lot mimics what's going on over 3800, because they have their rock wall now on behind the current houses, and then this will be back up on the other.
So having just paid for a rock wall in my backyard, it would seem like almost this is a benefit to
We
the
think it's
lot
huge,
owners,
yeah.
because then, of course, you'll build that cost into the price of the lot.
Yeah, but I think it should be able to make the end product, when it's finally done, less expensive. I can't guarantee it will, because we don't have any control over that. But where we're in doing it with the much larger machinery, it should have economies of scale. Now, the block walls are more expensive than just a rock wall, just material wise, but you end up with a better, cleaner, finished product that where the whole subdivision will be uniform and have a tied in.
Yeah.
And then also you have a lot better usable lot space.
Yeah, obviously, I think the drainage is really important, because I think there's been problems up
There has,
Yeah.
it's been a recurring problem, and that
With
was
drainage, so this,
Yeah,
I'm not an engineer or anything, but I think we have a couple of them here. That if the drainage goes into the storm sewer, that is a lot better. Just a couple of questions on the machinery. Josh brought this up. We've had kind of an issue with this before where it was hard to enforce the fact that everything stayed on site. And then, if that were to be approved by the council at some point in a meeting, there would seem that there'd have to be an agreement that had some pretty significant conditions in it if that was violated, where the city could act quickly and resolve that situation. I guess the other thing in regards to Josh's question too, is we have a sound ordinance, obviously, in the city. Are you aware of what that is, or will this stay under that sound ordinance?
I don't know what the decibel is on that, and is it? I'd have to look at the ordinance.
John probably knows by heart. John, what is the,
So it gets, the longer the noise persists, the quieter it has to be. And so like you can have instantaneous sounds of up to 95 decibels, but, and I can send you the actual code
Okay.
language. But, in theory, the goal is to keep it, if it's a neighborhood, to keep it down close to what you might expect from a lawnmower or something. You know, as you're on your property line, not necessarily right next to the equipment, but what it would be on the property line.
Okay. And I think the nearest, well, that's a vacant lot.
Doesn't it also have a beginning and an ending time?
Yes, and there is a form that the city has sent us as far as an operation time, and we would work with the city on that. I put down now 7:30 a.m. to 5 p.m. But I think we'd be, if the city wants to change that, I think we'd be open to those timeframes as well. I know, was it Josh that mentioned the dust? We do have a fugitive dust control plan that would be followed, that the material we use is watered down before it goes through, so there's no dust. The employees on site would be trained in that fugitive dust. There's a opacity test is what they call it, from 15 feet away. You need to shut down if it's over 20% from, I forget the other distance. Well, I think it's to the nearest home, it has to be at least 10% of the opacity. But we would follow that fugitive dust control plan. If it's really windy, things like that, and then things are dry, we would shut down.
we have our director of Department Head of Public Works here. Okay. How enforceable are these things, and what does it create from your standpoint as the director of Public Works?
And I guess that's our biggest thing from Public Works is that we just have to make that line be very, like, whatever it is, like if it's a sound ordinance, that we are very clear on so that we can go out and take do checks on that. If it's a dust thing, that it's something that we can measure, right? Because we just don't want to get to that gray area where it's like, we feel one way, that the crew feels a different way. And so then it just turns into a mess. That way we want, whatever it is, we just want it to be very clear so that everybody's on the same page. So that they can, do their crushing and, we feel like we're working together in this thing, so.
Do you have an estimate on duration? Like if I'm a resident, I'm wondering how long does this particular crushing or screening process?
At this location, we're probably, if we used to go nonstop, probably like a month, a little less. But the other thing is like we said, we have multiple phases going up the hill, and we'd like to continue this idea of a wall, you know what I mean? So, but for each phase, we would like to continue this. And so I think that's the other thing is we want to continue the relationship with the city. We're a good working relationship to where, whatever we agree on, we'll hold to, because we've got lots of, phases to come.
So you're saying is it 1 month per phase?
I couldn't say that just because each phase, one could be larger, one could have more earthwork.
Around that. though.
Yeah, yeah.
And the rock crushing for the next phase, will this rock crushing just be moved to the next phase, or you don't anticipate keeping this where it is for a long term?
No, it is moved.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's,
Yeah, at some point, if we found a spot that was like, we could set it away and it was like, we're located generally to where maybe we could use it for a few phases, we might do that. But currently, this is right in the next phase, that would be.
Yeah, Councilmember Watson.
Is there a distance that you have to keep this rock crushing from happening away from the homes that are currently there?
I
for
think,
safety reasons?
without saying it, but the sound one would probably be the one that dictate
Okay.
that. And it isn't a lot more, it has a diesel engine, it isn't a lot more than your normal construction equipment. The crushing itself can be a little bit, carry a little bit more, but it's just like a large.
It's not dangerous for the people that are living nearby.
No, there'll be no blasting. That's the other thing. We're just doing the alluvial up in the cobble, you know, so not getting in the bedrock, no blasting or anything to where. Anything like that.
That was my question, was if there would be blasting involved, because I would definitely encourage the council to consider a duration of term that you're, doing this. Because sometimes we have the best intentions, right? So like we had a construction project recently at my place of work and, we were told November was the deadline. Here we are in February, still going strong, right?
Yeah.
So that would be a concern I would have, just for, the sake of residents not having a continual operation in their backyard.
Yeah, we're good with that. The one thing that can make it a little tricky is when material's really wet, it's not able to screen well. And so you do play a little bit with Mother Nature, especially the way the weather's been now. But yeah, that's.
So Commissioner Green, you're speaking as a citizen of North Elton, correct?
I was invited as a planning commissioner, so I'm not sure. As a planning commissioner for North Ogden officially, is that accurate?
Yeah, you were invited, but it is a council meeting.
Oh, okay, am I not supposed to?
No, you can, just.
Oh, okay.
As a citizen, I just wanted everybody to
Okay.
understand.
I'm like,
You're not, I guess some here don't know who's on the city.
absolutely, absolutely. I just want to make sure I'm not violating any rules.
Everyone from the planning commission was invited to this, just so everyone knows.
Yes, good point. So,
So,
yes.
And we
Planning
appreciate,
commission, great.
and we appreciate you being,
Right.
showing up.
And then I just had one other thing to piggyback off of Commissioner, sorry, Watson. Just with that machinery, is there some kind of security that's going to be in place? Like we're talking fencing or just things to keep the machinery clear so we don't have neighborhood children exploring this area?
I mean, we haven't planned anything at the time now. I guess that'd be in the agreement.
No trespassing signs.
Yeah, we do have no
Ends of the
trespassing
roads.
signs currently posted there.
How well those working?
Yeah.
Well, I think the key here is that we have a resident here, is that if I'm hearing correctly, we need a pretty specific agreement that would have safety, obviously it's the first situation, in compliance with all city ordinances and other things that the council would feel would be important. Are you open to having a pretty specific agreement?
Yeah.
Those things?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, when we get it, as long as it's things that we'll have a discussion that we can meet, that we feel like we can meet. We don't want to have something that we can't meet, and I guess if we can't, then we can't move on, but definitely.
So we have public meetings.
Exactly, yeah, so.
Yeah, I just have a.
Tell me your name.
Karen,
Karen?
Bishop. We're talking a lot about like guns and noise, but what about like vibrations or like, how much vibration would this give off, pushing off like that?
Outside of the property there, you wouldn't notice them there feeling at all on that.
Even a dump truck.
Even 100 yards from it, you couldn't feel it, even probably 50 yards, if you stand on the ground, you can't.
Okay.
You can hear it in there, but not. Don't feel it.
You had your hand first.
Oh,
So if I were a resident that lived on 3800, I'd be happy to hear that you guys have a drainage plan and there's gonna be basically a pipe that keeps it in the proper places. But my mind goes to 20 or 30 years down the road. Whose responsibility is it if that pipe clogs and isn't functioning? Like, I'm just having a hard time visualizing that. What would you guys think?
That's something I guess we'll have to look into, like the one drain pipe there, in each lot, they'll have a stub where the roof drains get connected there, because that's one of the big things is they don't want point load of water to get behind the walls, that's where they can fail. So I think the homeowner would probably have to be somewhat obvious if that drain's getting backed up and overflowing, and then, at that point, it would be probably the homeowners, to a certain point, until it gets to probably the cities.
Yeah, I asked
That's
that
the thing that we need.
I asked that question on if it's a swell, whose responsibility it is to make sure the swell's in place. It's the lot owner, it's the homeowner. So I think they'd also be responsible for the pipe going through there. Actually, we looked at a lot up in that area and I decided not to buy it because on the plat there was that drainage swell and you can't landscape really without filling it in.
Yeah, that's been the problem. That's why we wanted to look at these other.
And so that's what happens, it just gets filled in. Councilmember Fuller, did you?
So, okay, I guess several things. Usually in the wall, pipe beneath it's perforated, isn't it? It's just sleeved and perforated.
The wall, sorry, the pipe that's in the wall is perforated and the wall is backfilled with gravel, but there'll be another pipe on top that's not perforated that takes all of the, because, as the engineers put it, the design, you really, that's the pipe in the wall is kind of like your last chance. You really don't want water getting to that point.
It's the pressure relief valve. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's literally the, okay. So that's one thing. Is it gravity or is it the pin and grid system or which?
Which one? They both will be gravity. Yeah.
So you don't, because that was the one thing I was worried about because I did the pin and grid and it was like, you can't put heavy machinery over top of that. And so that was one of my worries was that you finish all this nice wall and then you can't drive anything over it. But
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's one thing they probably need to tell folk is that I think there's, to a certain extent, even the 6 to 8 foot walls, that you can't have a crap ton of vibration. And that's the one thing that I worry about. That's the only thing I worry about, really, about this.
Have to be engineered, right? It's over 4 feet.
Yeah. Well, it's true, but if the engineer says you can't put a front end loader more than 10 feet from it, then that kind of restricts how you, anyway.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay, and really, I think the best part of this is the overall, because if you look just to the west, I mean, you had people with garden hoses from their backyard onto the street trying to drain their backyards, and this will alleviate all of that. So, and I think for those people that live on next to Josh and all that, they'll have a nice wall as opposed to, no offense to people that love rock walls. You know, and I guess that the other thing is that being a rock wall, non-enthusiast, I don't know what you say, but sorry, Eric Thomas for listening anyway, but is sealing it. And that was one thing that I didn't think about or know about until this past not rainy season, but bad winter. And all that efflorescence came out, and which is almost impossible to get rid of. So whatever you do to your wall, I think that would be the last thing is seal that. So anyway, 2 cents.
Councilmember Watson?
It sounds like there's a lot of benefits of doing this. Am I reading this right, that you're wanting to put in this retaining wall in people's already developed, lived in current homes, backyards?
No,
Okay.
Well, technically,
Well, it's not on their property though.
Yeah.
It's behind their home, but on the phase 9s, it'll all be on the phase 9s. There will be a few people we're probably gonna coordinate with because some of their excavation has gone onto our property.
And we've got rock walls that have gone
That
over
have
the property.
encroached onto ours, and so we're gonna have to somehow, deal with.
But
that.
this lower wall would be on these future lots.
It's 3 feet onto our property.
Okay.
you're supposed to have a base, some base.
Are these lots are the bottom lots gonna be pretty, I mean, are they gonna have flat backyards or almost, or what's that gonna look
Yeah,
like?
so this shows you, it's what we're planning on doing. So just if you look at, this is showing Mountain Road, so this is phase 9. And so we're coming down for the first 35 feet. Now, this is our grading that we're doing. And so it's not to dictate what the homeowner would do or the builder. But we're coming down 3% for the first 30 feet. And then we're gonna drop 10 feet over 40 feet, and that would be where the home's built for a walkout basement. And then we're at 2% for the backyard. And then on the uphill side, here, we're coming up, it's 20%, but what it is in that same 30 feet, it's 6 foot of rise to where the garage pad is. And looking at all of the existing homes, that's about where the ones that look like they can landscape well, they'll have a 6 foot rise to where the home is. And then we're coming 0.5% through the house, and then at about 2% on the backyard to where the wall is. Yeah.
Thanks, that's a great
So
explanation.
if you look at the existing ground, we pretty much follow the existing ground. From here to there, it's just gonna be more terraced.
Councilmember Severin, I think you have a comment?
I'm not an engineer. Though we have some very smart engineers on here. So my curiosity would be, because, and the mayor mentioned this, we've had problems with the rock walls in the past. So I'm kind of curious to know if you're between 183 and 184. You're not putting in a drain like you are between 180 and 189, right?
I believe it's gonna be between 183 and 180. Well, it's where the low spot is. Because there's a catch basin there that we'll tie into. All we need to do to our plat is add a utility easement there. There's not one shown. And we're gonna extend one up. It's either between, it's on one of those lot
It's
lines.
basically like a depression. where the water-
Yeah, it's just, it's where the low spot on this, these lots land.
If you look
It
at
might
that road,
be,
it kind of comes.
it might be the 183, 184.
Our low spots.
I think it probably is.
Now, again, I'm not an engineer, but wouldn't it give us a little bit more? I mean, in my mind, when you first said, we're gonna be putting between 188 and 189 this drain, and then you say it's just a depression. I'm getting a bit more worried about a depression.
That would be piped as well.
Oh, they're all pipes. Everything's pipes.
Oh,
Yeah,
they're
all
all
pipes. Yeah, all of them.
Okay, you just didn't have the little lines.
Right.
Yeah.
There, so I didn't know.
Yeah.
Yes, that will be piped.
Okay, thank you.
There'll be a
my
pipe
concern.
in this one for our next phase, and this is once we've looked at this rock wall, we realized that's our low spot, so we need to bring some of it here. Add to the platted drainage easement and pipe that as well
Okay,
to that catch basin.
Thank you.
One other question, Councilmember Fuller.
And just for, item of note, if you want a totally flat backyard, it's about 11 feet. Sorry, bad joke.
I just have one, thank you. I just have one clarifying question, back up here to this process, and this is just my first experience looking into this and researching it. Does this have a water, like, is there an element of water that is going to be a significant byproduct of that process up here, the rock crushing? et cetera?
No, there are water bars on it. That's how we mitigate the dust, but
Okay,
it's fairly low flow. It's like, it's probably like not even 10 to 15, probably on that one, it's probably like 10 gallons a minute at the
Okay.
time that it's needed.
and I ask
Where the
because.
drops come down, just keep the dust.
Gotcha.
Drops.
Because when I researched this a little, it seems like in past situations in other cities, they have requested like the use of a holding tank for any kind of drain off instead of using our sewer system. So that's just something I'm curious about what you would respond to.
Yeah, the one thing would be on our SWIP plan, that's where anything would be is just, I would say, from a SWIP plan from runoff that we'll have to address, but not from the process.
Okay,
Yeah, and nothing in the sewer, yeah.
thank you.
Anything else? Tell us your name.
I live on 3800 North. I'm just curious, is it known yet when that road is gonna be paved for that phase?
We probably will do it fairly soon in spring, like, depending on weather, but I would guess April, May.
Yeah, but it's so messy with all the activity you do,
Yeah.
and the stuff that comes down when it rains.
Yeah.
this is, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, the only other, as I think about the advantage of having the rock crusher. Obviously, we have a lot of complaints about trucks going up and down, up and down, up and down, and quite honestly. Let's see if I'm thinking this correctly. So if you had, let's say this was not approved, this idea, which again, I think is a very wise idea. You would be trucking up and down 450.
Yeah, Yeah.
Which would be,
Yeah.
we would get calls from people going.
yeah, and then auto truck, yeah.
And the safety issue too.
Yeah.
And the safety issue of the weight in the, the rock,
Up and down.
the back of the dump trucks. So of the two, in my opinion,
Yeah, the more likely is
This is the
we wouldn't
lesser
do
of
the
two.
walls.
what's that? I'm sorry.
The more likely is we probably wouldn't be able to afford to do the walls,
Is that
if we had
right?
to import
Okay.
everything, but you're right, if we were to
Import it all.
continue on and do it, it'd be then a lot of trucks. Yeah,
I guess another,
thousands of trucks.
another point too is if we didn't do this, these lots, especially these upper ones, they're gonna be wanting to haul material off. Find fill, somewhere to take clean fill. So us processing it where we can use it for, just for an example, on phase 8, it took more than 50 trucks just to bring import up, just to put the gas line in. Because the material wouldn't compact correctly and everything, so we had to have processed material brought up for import. That was over 50 trucks just for the gas line.
Well, I'm thinking that, John, didn't we have, over on, I can't remember the name of the development, but right down below the divide. They had like a little rock crusher.
And
That was a
White rock.
that's what the mayor mentioned earlier, where we had some issues, because the material was leaving the site. In fact, I tried to follow one of the trucks, and one of the other employees successfully followed one of the trucks to South Ogden. So it was being off-boarded. And, just to even circle back to some of the questions, someone asked, how far away from the property line does this need to be? That's part of the reason the council's discussing this, is that if you can set the parameters that you feel comfortable with, then we can give the Cecil and Brad a chance to respond and see if there's something that works, because currently the way it's kind of written is staff's a little iffy on if this will work. And it's not like all the benefits, the less impact on the roads and all that is fantastic. The hard thing, to Dave's point, is it's going to be a little bit more oversight and work on the behalf of the employees. And so I think that the idea is that this is a trial run to see if this works for this phase, to then know if we're going to keep doing it going up the hill. Because and so anything we do is going to be hey, this is for phase 9, and we're just trying to make sure it's going to work. And I think that, Cecil and Brett are going to be aware of that, and trying to make sure it works, because it will make their life easier, our life easier. And I imagine that equipment's not cheap, but it's probably a cheaper way to do this than moving everything in and out, as opposed to exporting it all, processing it, and bringing it back up the hill. So in theory, it can be a win-win for everybody, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't impose strict standards, noises, distances, all that kind of stuff, which it sounds like they're agreeable to. And there might even just be a certain fee so that we can make sure we're covering our employees' time to go double check these things.
And I think, if I understood right, Cecil and Brett are open to a specific agreement. Of course, I would say just because the council can't doesn't mean they should, but they should have reasonable protections for the citizens up there, safety being number one. So I think I heard you're open to seeing some specific things in agreement, and if they're reasonable for both parties, it's a win-win, then we can proceed along.
Yeah. I think one other thing I'd just like to discuss that hasn't come up is, and this is just so we address it at the front and we don't have issues moving on, is when this material is here, we would also like to use some, see our properties also at the top of Washington, like phase 8. And then we'd have to get an agreement, just so that if material is hauled from here over to there, you know what I'm saying? It's still part of the same project, that we're on the same page, that they would all of a sudden get sideways
We
somewhere.
can define what,
Yeah.
because I think John's got a
Yeah.
good point. Let's see how this works. So if the council decided to do this, it would be kind of on a test basis,
Yeah.
and we would define what that means in project
Yeah.
within there, so it doesn't,
Okay, yeah.
because you guys have lots of projects.
Yeah, and the other thing we would like to do is have the material, like Cecil mentioned earlier, we don't build the homes, we sell them to several different home builders and individuals. We'd like to have the material available to that homeowner also that's on these phases. They'd be resold back to them, obviously at less than what they could get it hauled in for. But then if we don't want any agreement that the material can't be sold. I guess, you know what I'm saying, that way, because.
For driveways.
Yeah, sold off-site,
Yeah,
but for
sold
it's
off-site,
on
but
project.
If it benefits the residents,
Yeah.
up there, then I think that's a good selling point. So, John, where do we go from here in your, what do you want to do? You want to put together kind of a proposed agreement? Need to go, what, planning commission, what do you want to do from here so we can proceed?
So I think if I would say getting an agreement together with these details, with some of the notes that I've made on the points that are important to the council, is probably the best step. And then we can bring that back. I mean, if we could knock it out before Thursday, I'd be comfortable bringing it back on Tuesday to the council if the council wanted.
So, John, did you take notes of what's important to the citizens out there?
Yes, I've been taking notes, and I will re-listen to this portion of the meeting as well.
Josh, did you have another comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what JD said. I appreciate his comment about what happens to the drainage system, who's liable. There's probably 20 years from now. I'm just wondering if the developer has any responsibility to make sure it's working properly after the lots are sold, because you don't really know until there's a big rainstorm and you have a heavy winter. Is there any liability they have for the first, couple of years?
I think and John could formulate this better, but I think once the inspection's done and it's shown that's properly working, it then becomes the obligation. Just like with the swell, once that is put in and the lot is sold, it becomes the lot owner's responsibility. I think it'd be the same with the pipe, but I think Dave and Crystal from the standpoint of SWIP and making sure that it's meeting the requirements of the storm sewer, it would be tested to make sure it's effectively working initially. But after that, it does become the responsibility of the homeowner. Is that right, John?
Yes.
Lucky guess on my part. Okay, so, but that's just like with the swells right now, and I can tell you that's what's happening in other areas of the city where we've got problems. Where it was agreed in the development to put in a swell. And then each lot owner gets it and they don't want, it's hard to landscape around it. So they just fill it in and then there's no swell, right? And then the water just starts coming the opposite direction instead of going where it does. So I think, there'd be inspection to make sure that it's initially working, whether somebody hooks the hose up or whatever. I don't know how they test it. But once it's signed off as initially meeting the requirements, then yes, it does become the lot owner's responsibility.
And so just a follow-up question, maybe this is better for the attorney, but being on the lower part of the land, let's say we have a large rainstorm, and I've never had any water problems previously in our home. And with this development goes in and then I have a water problem, am I out of luck, or does the home above me, if they did not properly maintain their property, are they, legally responsible for
that is a good question for the attorney.
Well, the nice thing is the answer is always it depends. But the reality of those is Utah is a weird water law state, meaning if you are directing water into your neighbor, but you're protecting your own property, then you have more protection than if you're doing it just randomly. And so it's going to be fact dependent, but the neighboring property owner does have some liability for those things, but it's not absolute strict liability, which is, like if you're doing blasting, for example, you have strict liability for any damage that happens around the blasting site.
Right.
So.
Just a curious question, okay? I mean, we saw last year with our heavy winter, things happened in 1700 that we never anticipated, right? So will these pipes be sufficient to take a serious amount of water? Should we have future heavy?
Well, the engineer will design as such. We'll leave that to them. Yeah. Okay, so, and they should have calculations backed up, we will be approved, so.
Okay.
Now you just have to figure out how to get that much water and then make sure it works.
Yeah, exactly.
That would be my concern is.
It gets over.
The only problem with that is the engineers will usually engineer it to like 100-year storm. They probably won't engineer it to a once every 1,000-year snowpack year. Because last year we had record high snowpack and we had a lot of issues everywhere in the city because it wasn't 100-year snowpack, it was really high. So.
Other questions, council? Commissioner Green? Residents? So I would encourage you, as the agreement is put together, so you come and participate with us again to make sure we've addressed the issues. That we get a reasonable agreement that is a win-win for everyone, so.
I just have one quick question.
Yes.
So how many more phases are there? Is the phase only going to go to power lines and then that's when all construction stops as far as road?
There's a good portion of that land up there that has not been annexed into the city. So, I don't know where the city boundary currently is. John, how far up is that?
So directly above this phase, the power line is the boundary line between the forest and private property. But to the west or to the east a little bit above the cove, there's some private property that's above the power lines. And so it's just a matter of, oh, sorry, I misspoke. There is another private parcel up there above the power line. So there is some private land, but it may be too steep to qualify for our development ordinance. We'd have to look at that.
And that private land, a lot of it has not been annexed into the city, right, John?
Correct. Yeah. We have not annexed anything above the power lines.
The north view only goes to the power lines. This development.
So that's a good question.
It does, thank you.
Anything else? Okay. Thanks for
I
joining
think
us tonight, and we'll have John start working on putting something together.
Great, appreciate it.
Thanks for coming. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
All right, we're gonna move on to item number 6 on the agenda, which is presented by Mr. John Hanson on Century Farms. John, do you want to come up and form the group here?
Thank you. Yeah, thanks.
Have a good evening, Cecil.
Thank you. I want to make an announcement. I don't hear very well, and my two assistants aren't here, so if you speak, speak up.
Okay.
And I'll tell you, I'll speak up. I talk loud. Well, appreciate the opportunity to come before two new council members and the rest of the veterans here. For the past almost 3 years, I've been trying to develop the property known as the Shaw property across from Lee's. There's 6 acres there. So we've gone back and forth. Originally, we were gonna put townhomes there. And then the city council, the mayor, and a lot of us went and visited single family homes, little homes on 40-foot lots. And that seemed to be, gosh, that got me pretty excited. I thought, you know, those were really limited. Well, that all happened, and then, as you know, we've hit a real roadblock in the real estate industry. And the governor and other mayors are very concerned about having affordable housing, and who knows what that is. Some people think it's 350. I think that's what the mayor said, others 400, whatever. So I prepared a couple of scenarios. Can you see that? You can?
Well, I saw it in the, I was looking at.
I did two. I did one February 6th. That's the latest one. Yes. So if you look at this exhibit here, this would be a single family home. And it's unbelievable. Blake would know this, but they're between $525,000 and $530,000 for a small home. So I did some projections there to see, could I even sell these? Well, this first one here is an FHA 30-year loan. And as you look down there, the payments would be $3,828 a month to build that single family home. And a buyer would need $30,348 down. Well, I can tell you, there aren't a lot of couples running around that have $30,000 unless dad, mom, or grandpa Berube helps them. I don't know. It'd have to come from someone. So I looked at that, and this is the conventional loan. This even gets worse. And I did an interest rate at 6.5. Like, it may come down a little, but it's up to 6.2 or 6.6 now. I did it at 6.5. A couple would have to have $38,000 down if they did a conventional loan. And then their payments would be $3,732. So as I looked at that, I thought, well, maybe there's a better way, or we could help some younger couples or someone at least get into housing rather than just rentals. And so then I did the townhomes. And this, John, he's on the ball, isn't he? You do that, John?
Yep.
That was good. So a townhome right now, Nelson Homes or Rainier or whoever you have, those townhomes are around $400,000 now. 400. And can we do it for 385? I don't know. I just put a number up there of 400. And the scary part is that the couple's payment would be $3,063 a month. I mean, and I forgot to tell you that on the bottom. We'll do this one here on the townhome. You look at the very bottom of the scenario, John, if you can pull that up and blow it up a little bit. They would have to make $94,000 a year just to afford the townhome. That's a lot of money for couples to have to do. And the other is $117,000 a year. So I'm really in a quandary as to what to do to help young couples, help get the property sold, provide some, quality housing there. My only hope is, in some ways, that this darn interest rate would come down, which obviously would lower that monthly payment for them. And so what I'm asking from the commission, the city council, if they would consider letting me redraw that from 43 single-family homes into townhomes, that would be very nice. And John, did you get the pictures that they sent? These are just renderings. This isn't anything I've designed, but they would look something like this. My granddaughter just bought one over here in Harrisville and is thrilled to death to have a house for her dogs. So I think I did a couple, John, didn't I? There's a couple others in there. There's a myriad of different designs that could go there, which I would want to work with the city council and the mayor with, because I would really want to make it nice. I mean, I've been around here a lot of years, as long as older than some of you are. And everything I put my hands on has been good. And the same as this property here. So that's all I'm asking, is if that's something, and maybe you need to think about it, would you consider allowing me to change it from single family residential homes, which would look almost like that? They're just 5 feet in between them. And here they're attached, to do a townhome that hopefully would be, well, I know it's more affordable for a lot of people. $800 to $900 a month more is a lot of money. And so that's my, really, I have the zoning, I could start building single family now, but I'm just afraid to put that product on the market because of the cost of everything. Any questions? That's my sermon.
Hey, John, remind me how many townhomes you're thinking of there?
I'm shooting, if I could get around 58, but I have to have the what they call open space and everything, 58 to 60. This is 34. And then also there's going to be a park. I don't know if you have the site plan of that, John.
Let me see if I can grab it.
You know where the old city maintenance buildings are?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm giving a 10,000 square foot piece of property for your park and helping pay for your park. So there on the east side, I think it's close to 2 acres. I think I didn't bring that exhibit. It's about a 2-acre park that will be next to this. So, and I heard a rumor you're gonna close Pleasant View Drive, and that's okay. I'm from Pleasant View. I don't care. I'll speak for the town. So that, it's just the market we're in. I mean, these young kids are in trouble. My grandkids, your kids eventually, they need to have some ownership into something.
per acreage wise, you went from 43 to 58, what? So per unit?
Now, you remember I told you I started, you gotta yell at me.
Okay, so, so you said 43 to 58, where does the acreage per unit go?
We're gonna be, right now, I'm about, 4.5 to 5 units per acre. And this will be, I'll have to look at it, it's gonna be close to 8 or 9, however it lays out, it's not a square piece of property. And then there's another factor that I don't like to bring up because, I should be sharper than this, but there's a 38-foot slope from Longman View to Pleasant View Drive. It makes it very difficult to put a 40-foot house there, front frontage, and do the landscaping and the retention and that. Whereas the townhomes, they tell me now, would be much easier. And that's where I started this whole project. I don't know. I mean, I like the single family homes. The mayor and we loved them. I don't have any problem. I liked them. But I just don't know that they're practical now. At least for me, to tackle those.
I guess, I mean, I have literally practical experience here. My son is trying to do what you're talking about. And right now, literally, we're going up to Brigham City and Fremont.
To buy, not to develop?
To buy.
Yeah, because we have townhomes we're selling there by Maddox, and they're $385. That's the cheapest ones, one of my agents is doing it, $385, up about $400. Kaysville, they're $425 to $450. So I hate to force all our kids to Honeyville and to the border of Malad. That's a pretty bleak place, but it's going that way. So I don't know, Mayor, I'm not, if that's something maybe, if they had a question or if they'd consider it, that's all I'm asking.
Well, I'm sure they're open to considering it. I'm just saying, what other questions do you have for you to consider, Councilmember Watson?
Really more maybe a question for Ryan. If this change, or I'm sorry, I said Ryan.
I'm like, I don't know anything about this.
Sorry, John. I'm trying to think of a question for John. So if this development agreement changes, then does that mean the items that were promised from the first time, including the park, fixing the road, the sidewalk, adding streetlights, any of those things that
It all stays the same.
does that all stay?
I was thinking an increase, John.
So any
No,
amendment,
I've made a commitment, it'll all stay the same.
the agreements would stay the same, or the agreement would stay in place until a new agreement if the parties came to it at the same
We would
page
just
on
need
that.
to transfer that over.
Yep.
I'm happy to donate to North Ogden City. So,
Councilmember Dowpass?
So my initial thoughts on this, first of all, I'm just looking at the general plan. And this area is listed as residential low density. So it's, at some point, we had a general plan that said we want this to be low density. So I just want to make that very clear as we're talking about this and discussing this. The other thing is, you know, even though everyone is so mindful of housing costs and how crazy it is right now, my initial instinct is the houses that were first proposed on this development before, to me, they were not a first home, they're a second home, at least in my experience, that would have been a second home to me. Like I bought my first home that was smaller. In my example, I was married 15 years ago. We bought our first house in Ogden in a nice little neighborhood above Harrison Boulevard. And it was far less expensive than living in North Ogden at the time. And so we had to get in there, we had to get the equity. And then when we were lucky enough to be able to sell that in 2017 and have the equity, we moved to North Ogden where we were born and raised and truly wanted to be. And so my concern with this narrative is that it's, you know, are we saying that you are a newlywed and you have to have a brand new home? That just seems kind of crazy to me. I know that that's a dream of people, and if they have the income to be able to do it, that's great, but I loved what this development was before. I liked that it was a middle of the road option for people. And I understand that you're playing the numbers, you're showing the numbers, that how can people afford this? Well, the way that most people are going to be able to afford it is because it's the second home that they've ever purchased, because they have equity that they put into it. So, we have some really successful homes in the, I think it's the Montgomery subdivision, or the one that's down by 2000 North. They're in that range of size where they're a 2-level and they're about 2,500 square feet. And I've been watching the MLS on those, and they're selling pretty successfully.
Yeah, I did that development.
Okay, well, there you go. I think they're selling successfully.
Yeah, the lots are bigger. The lots are 10 to 15. And I agree with you, except if you look over all of Weaver County, there isn't anything hardly for sale in Weaver County under $300,000, if any. Wish my son were here. He does that. Blake may know. There's nothing for sale anymore in Ogden or wherever. So is it a first home? I think it is. There may be someone that a divorce or another couple of, want to move into one. But these type of houses are becoming permanent for a lot of people, even couples, young couples. So I'm not saying they would just be all newly married. We'd have a spectrum of people that would go there to live. I'm just saying the income. The reality is the income that Weaver County pays does not keep pace with the inflation and the price of housing. I think it's the income of what we have.
Let me ask Scott a question. The governor and the legislature is really pushing on this. In fact, the new first-time home buyer, where I think they get $20,000 to cover some of these costs, requires a single family new construction to meet that. The legislature is still trying to push this bill through that cities can't zone for anything less than 8 units per acre. Is that correct?
As long as the developers would be given 8 units an acre, carte blanche anywhere, as long as they can provide 6 of those 8 units at an area median income level. And that number keeps changing, but it's basically if a developer came forward and said, I can sell 6 of these at what the governor or what the state legislature has considered affordable, the city couldn't require any less density than 8 units per acre. So there's a market solution on that side.
Yeah, second question is, JD said that this was initially zoned for low density. It seems like, this was originally recommended from the planning commission as townhouses.
Right.
So the general plan designation.
Reconcile that.
Yeah, the general plan designation in this area, you have to zoom in kind of tight on it, is the downtown mixed use, which is the same zoning designation that we gave, that the council provided the R4 rezone on a few weeks ago next to the skate park. So the downtown mixed use is made up of several types of zones. So this is just south of the residential low density area on the 2021 future land use map.
So this does allow for a higher density on the general plan.
Yeah, the council still gets to make those decisions context based
But on the general plan,
it could be
an option.
supported.
It is an option.
Isn't it the downtown or something?
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's what he
mixed
was.
use downtown, mixed use like downtown.
What other questions?
I understand what you're saying. Because you're looking at the income and the house payment and saying that's a second time. But I used to teach school and you either get 2 jobs or your wife works. That's what I found out when I was teaching, and Blake knows the same. He got another job and I got another job, but I don't know if, I'm not trying to say every home will go to a newlywed. I'm just looking at how many people would make $117,000 a year even together to get into a single family home.
Commissioner Green?
Yeah. I don't have a specific question mostly because I haven't seen the exact plans, I don't have access to some of these docs. So I'm curious to see what this looks like when it's played out. The one thing I would note is I was questioning the general plan comment, which we've now clarified, just because it feels like this would be what the general plan would intend. I can't speak for obviously the planning commission, but my general thoughts is that this seems aligned with what the general plan would recommend. And then I just wanted to second, the only consideration that I would, want the council to maybe think of from the planning commission standpoint is we just went to a conference on planning in Utah. One of the really interesting facts that I thought economically really spoke to me in terms of North Ogden is that if families can get affordable housing that again is affordable keyword, which that even seems hard, they spend more money in the local economy. So when they're renting, that rent often goes outside of our economy, doesn't support our local North Ogden businesses, which I thought was an interesting point. And then finally, I just want to quickly add that the teacher comment is so true. I currently have several teachers living in apartments because they cannot afford housing in the local area.
Sure.
So they're my age or older, so.
Okay. John, what would be the process? Would John then make a proposal to the planning commission, who would then make a recommendation to the council for their decision?
Yes, that's the correct process, Mayor.
You ever thought about seller financing or anything, John, to help these couples get in there?
I did originally talk to the police chief to see if I could help some of your policemen, and then everything went crazy. Marco went bad. Yeah, I was willing to step up and help some of your officers to get into a home.
So John, is that the next process though? Let me just ask council, are you willing to look at it, or do you just want to stick with the original plan? What's your desire?
I'd like to stick with it the way it was, but that's just one person on the council.
You have to see everything. I think honestly, the way that things are going right now, it's hard. In certain aspects, you're talking 8 units per acre, and that's when he said that, I was like, you're not gonna, in some instances, you're not gonna get around from that. But I'd like to see both, because I'd like what JD's saying is that if you have a plan, stick to it, but in retrospect of what's been going on lately and the cost of what we're talking about,
I think interest rates, when that was put in place, it was kind of an experiment to see how those houses look. I think interest rates were 2 or 3% back then. Which allowed us to kind of look at this experimental situation in the city. Is Councilman Barker still with us? So we haven't heard from him much this evening.
He is, oh, he's unmuted himself.
Yep, I'm still here. I like the plan. However, I believe in the process, and if he wants to submit to the planning commission, then let's go through that route.
I guess I just feel like I need some more clarity on this legislative rule that's coming into play. Would the new legislation be relate more to the new plan than to the original plan?
We don't have a bill file yet, so it's Representative Ward's bill. There's like a bill file floated, but no firm language yet. Originally it had the single family homes only. It was the 8 units the acre, 6 of them being subsidized down to like 80% area median income. The building community came back and said that doesn't seem even reasonably feasible. So then it was like 100 to 120% of area median income, which these might hit, but so far everything has been single family standalone homes, not connected units. And that's kind of the governor's pitch as well, is that it should be standalone single family homes. And I don't know if the legislature is going to come off of that standpoint. I encourage you to attend on, the Monday legislative policy committee meetings that Utah League of Cities and Towns hosts. So we'll just wait. This is a waiting game for the 45 days through the session through March 1st on what the bill will ultimately come out. And then it might, but again, the developer would have to bring forward a product that they can sell at a fixed rate. And then there were some other subsidy regulations like self-inflicted. You couldn't resell that home for so many years. there was a limit on the, appreciation on those homes, so the development community hasn't really been the one with like the foot forward pushing, it's been more, other folks.
The other thing that the governor's pushing that makes it difficult to make them look nice and is, he's saying to get where they need to be, carports, not necessarily garages. Very difficult to say what the aesthetics would look like because it just ratchets up the costs. I think the thing that is obvious here is the legislature is pushing for affordable housing. And they're basically saying, cities, if you don't zone like we want, we'll fix it ourselves. I mean, I think that's what I see happening here. Whether it'll get approved or not is, Blake, what,
Well, I
What
was
do you
just
gotta
gonna
say?
say, if you, Councilman Watson, H Bill 306 is what we've been talking about. And according to the material, on line 98, municipalities are only allowed to impact fees related to road, sewer, and fire protection.
yeah,
So we may not even be able to do anything.
they
with
killed
parks.
that one.
It hasn't been killed as of this afternoon.
Ryan Wilcox said it was on the impact fees. Or are you talking about affordable housing ones?
This is still that pending bill. It's gone through House rules. I think it hasn't had a committee vote, but in board's bill, it restricts what we can collect for impact fees. So we would no longer collect for transportation or park impact fees, which is relatively small for our, honestly, it's pretty small for our homes to save like $2,000 or $3,000 or $4,000 total on the price of a $550,000 house. Is going to create affordability, I think is a stretch, but that's been the municipal line is basically our impact fees pay for the true impact of those uses, so don't touch them. But you're right, they're looking at many creative ways to
Lessen the price of getting into new homes.
I have here a message from one of my legislators that says, looks like we've got that impact bill killed.
So that may be,
So
that may be still 188.
there. So do you, are you willing?
I'm okay to revisit it.
Councilmember Fulmer, Councilmember Watson, and Councilmember Barker. So, John, they're willing to reconsider it if you'd like to,
I'll do some drawings, some
go back to
updated
the planning
drawings.
commission and follow the process. Sounds like they're willing to at least look at it. No guarantees.
Thank you for considering.
It's like they're willing to look at it.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Mr. Hanson. Thank you. Thank you. Now on item number 7, public comments. I'll grab it. No, I'll grab it.
Kevin Burns, I live in North Ogden. I would like to say, I paid attention back when Mr. Hanson originally presented this plan for the single family homes. We talked about that, and I remember the discussion about some townhomes and the park and that, and I think that's great. I think it's pretty admirable of Mr. Hanson to come forward at this point and ask for a change in the process, because as we've learned over the last little while, it's important to follow that process. Ask for it, work through it, and instead of not getting your way and throwing a tantrum and then getting it changed and having to come back and live with that. We've watched that. Zoning seems to be one of the hot topics right now, all across the state. And if you want to know why the state legislature is going to step in and take over zoning, attend a city council meeting. That's all I have for that. Thank you very much.
Brenda Ashdown, I live in North Ogden. This is not. Oh, I just think.
Hopefully not working.
I don't like Mr. Hanson's plan. He first brought townhomes. You guys turned it down, then he brought the individual homes. You agreed to it. Part of the reason you agreed to it is because of the transition, because across the street are full-size homes, not even little homes, but full-size homes. This was not an acceptable transition.
from, townhomes to full-size homes. This is, I would really hope that you guys would go back, look at that discussion that was had before and why the decision was made that it was made. Yes, this is a personal thing for me. I don't want a bunch of townhomes across the street in my neighborhood. I have a big piece of property, a big house, both big house. I have a little old farmhouse, but both subdivisions on the side of me are full-size homes. The Jones home across the street, which will be right next door to these, are full-size homes. And honestly, if I was buying as a newlywed, I'd rather a home than a townhome. And if I'm buying as my aged person, I want a home that's not gonna have a whole bunch of stairs versus a townhome. My opinion, thank you.
Anyone else this evening? John, anyone online?
We do have two raised hands, one from Susan Kilmore.
Okay.
Susan Kilborn, North Ogden City resident. I was just thinking about, quit laughing, Blake. I was just thinking about the situation that I found myself in when I moved here to North Ogden. I had a 3-year-old son, and at that time, I was the only parent. I could not afford to buy this home that I love so much in North Ogden as such. However, I was lucky enough that the owner of the home and I entered into an agreement of lease to own. So I leased our home for 2 years. And at the end of that period of time, the owner and I sat down and I told them I wanted to buy the home. They applied 2/3, it could be anything, of what I had paid in rent to buying my home. So I'm wondering if maybe that might be an option that some young people could consider and some builder would be willing to engage in a long-term owner. And that's all I have. Thank you. You guys be safe.
Thanks, Susan. Anyone else, John?
We have Merrill Sunderland.
Let's hear from Merrill.
Unmute. Tell me when you can hear me.
Gotcha.
Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Oh, great. Well, it was really, really nice to be introduced, John. This is Merrill Sunderland, North Ogden City resident. First of all, as I enjoy staring at this camera view of all of you, I am quite encouraged. Yeah, you can smile at me. I am quite encouraged by the mayor and council taking these issues and reviewing them and looking at the different factors that have to do with, for example, tonight. My comment is Council Member Jay Dalpass said a few things about this issue. And if I've got it correct, it is changing a plan from single family homes to townhomes. And I really, really liked what Jay said about the logic, the direction, and the feeling of North Ogden. So I would urge caution in changing to townhomes. There are reasons on both sides of that issue. And we've heard both sides, part of both sides just this evening. So keep it up, council. Appreciate observing you doing your work to try to take care of this kind of an issue when I think there are a lot of unspoken people in North Ogden who really like the idea of single-family homes at whatever state legal rate is allowed. Thank you.
Anyone else, John?
Nope.
I have one more question.
Brenda Ashdown, North Ogden, sorry, my head gets one direction then. And maybe this is different because it's a work meeting, but I saw that Mr. Hanson was on the agenda, but he was not in the packet. So we, if I'm looking at the packet and I'm interested in coming to the meetings and making public comments, I have no idea what he's talking about. Does there not need to be some information of someone who's presenting what they're presenting about?
Mr. Call, you'll answer that question.
So it kind of goes back to the earlier discussion about doing the best you can with the information. The things that were shown today were emailed over today. And typically when it's a work session and we are not making a decision, it's not as critical that we get the information in the packet, knowing that there'll be future meetings. But we do try to, like we did with the information for the Northview Estates, for example, that we had earlier.
Thank you, that was what I was thinking.
Anyone else? Okay, any comments from staff this evening?
I do have one, Mayor.
Go ahead, John.
Just to answer the question earlier about Freedom of Information Act, it does not apply to actually Congress, courts, state, or local governments. Although in the Freedom of Information Act, there is an expectation that states have a program where residents can get documents from, and that's why we have our grandma request rules.
Okay. Anything else, John?
No.
I have a comment, Mayor.
Yes, right.
Well, really, I guess it's a question. I am sure that you guys noted the change in the minutes from how they were done previous when we outsourced the minute writing to me taking over. So I just wanted to ask for any feedback if you are liking the new layout, if you are liking the way that they are being more summarized than they were before. I just wanted to get what you guys were thinking. Otherwise, I'll continue to do them as I did.
I thought we were moving to just a brief summary with a reference to the recording. Are we still moving that direction?
Yeah, that was my best effort in doing so. I tried to sum it up as much as I could in thinking, down the road in a few years from now, 20, 30 years, what would be important for the reader to see. And so that is my effort in summing them up.
Okay.
But I am happy to do so more if you would like.
I think less issues were found in the ones that you did. I think most of my corrections were from before.
For the record, yes, that's true.
So that's a good thing. I think they worked well. We'll just have to keep watching it and make sure we continue to feel comfortable with the way that you're doing with them, but they look good to me.
Thank you, I appreciate the feedback.
Councilmember Watson.
So is the idea that even if the summary was much, much shorter, there's also a link to listen, and so either way you could find it, is that what we're saying?
Yeah, the reference where that is in the recording, like
Right.
1 hour, 3 minutes.
It's not a link, it's just a timestamp, so that people could find and listen themselves to exactly what was said. I try to give an idea as to what was said as well, but we put the timestamp so there won't be any question.
Okay.
Okay. Any other feedback for Ryan? Dave? No, sir. Scott? Council, anything else? Councilman Fulmer?
Tomorrow, budget subcommittee. First. Could be fun.
3 o'clock, right?
3 o'clock, I mean. Yep.
All right, Councilmember Watson, did you have another comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to make you all aware that I spoke with Justin and John recently. I guess the state labor laws that we have been following are no longer sufficient, and we need to be following now federal labor laws. So Justin feels pressure at the pool because it's already hard to hire the 11 lifeguards, but there's some restrictions now that are more restrictive to him. That has to do with whether they're 16 years old or younger. And so that he can still hire younger, but there's just more restrictions. And so if anyone knows of anyone who is willing to be a lifeguard, they need to apply by February 15th, which is just around the corner, so that they can get their certification in time. So if you can spread the word and help with that, they're looking for as many as they possibly can.
Okay. Yeah. Seeing none, I'd look for a motion